So here's us on the Raggedy Edge. Welcome to episode 10 of So Here's Us on the Raggedy Edge. I'm Matthew Broyes, your host. Got a special guest, longtime friend of the show and myself, Mr. Edward Brown. He's a writer and about as broad a beat as you can possibly... Do they still say beat? Is that still a thing that journalists have?
It's kind of an old... You're going to age yourself if you say that, but you're welcome to say that.
Oh, I age myself just by existing, really, but...
They're going to think you're drawing Social Security if you use that term. But.
Oh, there's no Social Security anymore, but yeah. So you now write for... I know you've been writing for multiple publications. I've seen a lot of your stuff in Paper City and stuff like that. And I don't know how many publications you write for.
That's my big one right now, and it's a lot of fun. It's very different. I kind of tell people you couldn't have gone to a more different publication, but also just kind of the stuff I do. So I mean, it is a luxury lifestyle magazine.
Yeah. And
I used to write for, at least I was most well known for, an alt weekly.
Yeah.
And so, alt weeklies, you can cuss if you want to. You want to see the F-bomb in print. Right, yeah. You can do that. Do an alt weekly. You're going to kind of do a lot of irreverent, kind of darks, often kind of, especially on the news side.
Yeah, yeah.
And now I'm I'm getting schmoozed and wine and dine. I'm literally eating caviar and drinking champagne at these hotels. And I was like... I mean, that's not a bad gig, though. 10 years ago.
That's not a bad gig. I mean, it's like you kind of have to use your church voice. Or your grandma voice, to
got to be very polite. Yeah. Is that lawnmower? Can you hear it?
No, not really.
Good. Okay.
We here at the podcast are not afraid of big lawnmower and its machinations. One of the things
are we talking about politics now?
Well, I pretty much always am these days, but that's in that instance. I don't know. I don't know if there's a lawnmower component to the current junta, but. If there is
chainsaw components, I would say
there's definitely there are power tools involved for sure.
Yeah, and kids that are not qualified to use big tools are using them.
No, like big balls. Yeah. Our friend Big Balls does stuff like that, and I don't know. One of the things that I know you've covered for a long time. In fact, that was like one of the first ways I met you. Was you cover a lot of arts stuff, and I go back and forth of like the temperature of the Fort Worth art scene at this moment, because there's some things that are definitely hopping and there's other things that are kind of struggling. And I don't know what your sense of that is.
I'm glad you brought that topic up. Actually, I was going to, but originally for this show, I had a good topic. We can still talk about it. Oh, well,
yeah, whatever you want.
What is the true religion? And I figure people are so busy these days. Who wants to waste their time going to the wrong church?
Oh, yeah.
Or the wrong place? We could save these people time and just tell them, what is the right, the true religion.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of those things that depending on who you ask, you get a lot of different answers on that. I mean, I would tend to venture that America's true religion is money, but
oh, nice.
I don't know.
Well, I think South Park said it was Mormonism.
That's Utah's.
There was a funny episode where everyone went to heaven, and they're like, and I think Gabriel's like, and yes, the real. Oh no, they were all in hell. Yeah, you had all these Christians in hell, and right. Someone finally told them, "Oh God's Mormon."
Right? Yeah, the Mormons were right. Yeah. Yeah, and everybody kind of lives in anticipation of that moment, right? Of getting up there and be like, okay, did I win? you know, and then you find out that he's Jewish or whatever, you know, and so it's like,
jokes on us. Well, so anyway, I like this topic, and last week or a week and a half ago, I went to the Art Summit. So
I saw an article about that,
and I was talking, and so I've been talking to arts people. This has been an interesting conversation that I have a little bit of perspective on because. Oh man, going back, I'm going to Google this story I wrote. It was like one of the first ones I wrote for the weekly, and it's so like emblematic of where we're at in arts funding. And people forget about this. It's called Ebbing Tide. Is it arts funding? It was an interesting. Okay, so 2013.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go back in time. So, because my whole point is we keep going in this cycle with arts funding. That if you're not paying attention, you think it's a new problem. 2013, so that's over 12 years ago.
Yeah,
talks about gutting the Arts Council of Fort Worth.
So this is a long-term thing here.
Yeah, so this is so we've been in this cycle so often. It was down to 800,000 something at that time. Half of what it had been. I think it's not even back to where that means that it was at 1.6 million, so it's 1.1 now. So we never even got back to these numbers. Talks about about arts funding, and the city of Fort Worth had. What was interesting about this story is the city of Fort Worth had cut all the money from arts funding and put it in Dickies Arena because most cities, their hotel occupancy tax goes to the arts. Austin, Dallas, Houston. That's pretty common.
Yeah.
And I think, to this day, actually, I can say we don't do that. And that's because we started diverting it to Dickies, which is a private business, you know.
Well, there's debate on that because people will be like, well, it's owned by the taxpayers. Like, kind of, though, but it's also run by, a corporation and it's a very Fort Worth way of thinking. So we've recently had the thing with the Community Arts Center, and in those meetings that they were having about it, people were going, well, we need to put some hotels and some, retail and things like that. And that seems to be the solution to everything. It's like, we're going to tear down the antique mall, going to put up hotels and some shops. And like, I worry that the whole thing, by the time we get done with all this, we're going to have a town that's nothing but hotels and little shops, and I don't know why that's always the solution to everything. But, when you talk about, though, there are other cities that will give funding to, the arts. And Fort Worth for a long time was real good at that. We have 3 fantastic art museums as a result of that. But some of it also, that's private philanthropic giving as well. I don't know if that I don't know if that has that kept up, or is that also kind of waning along with the public support?
Well, I would say we do have a very strong philanthropic history, and we still have very strong giving in Fort Worth, but those are through foundations, and those are hard to tap into. They kind of have chosen who they're going to give money to. Yeah, right. And they renew those, they give to the Presbyterian Night Shelter, or they give to this or that, which is great. But then if you're a new nonprofit, if you're a new arts collective, if you're, a new nonprofit that's looking for money, that's not really an option, because those dollars are accounted for, and that's why the Arts Council is so important. Arts Fort Worth is because their mission is to be available to anyone who applies, right? Yeah. So it is a big deal. We might have our foundations in Fort Worth, and they probably do give hundreds of millions of dollars away every year. But when we talk about the health of the arts, that's really not where they're going to get their money from, realistically. And
it's weird too, because I've wondered, I don't know if you feel this, that it feels like it reflects a larger American trend of just kind of devaluing arts generally, that's kind of been going for at least a decade or so, culminating in things like the AI, deal of just replacing artists entirely. And it always feels like we're kind of the last on the docket, for everything. And I don't know, there's a lot of reasons for it, some of which are political. Others are just kind of the way culture has gone lately. I don't know if you have a perspective on that.
Unfortunately, in Fort Worth, I see that group just, I guess, financially struggling. I'm on the board of Art Tooth. I'm not saying we're struggling, but it's hard. And that's why, I can say with certainty, again, having been on the board of Art Tooth for a good 4 or 5 years, we don't have the foundational philanthropists approaching us for money. We are really just trying to get, as best we can, private donations, grassroots fundraising. It's tough, just to come up with, maybe $30,000 a year. And then at the same time, what we offer to Fort Worth, the party bus. I mean, these are things that are right. Even if you just look at that and all the art shows, like culturally, we make Fort Worth what it purports to be, right? It's because of artists that are out there making art.
Well, but that's one of those funny things is that, they'll say that and they'll go, oh, in the same way that they'll go, well, Austin is a music town, and then they don't support, a lot of folks don't support the music. And, if you're going to have an art town, you have to support the artists and you have to make sure they can eat. And that doesn't mean, giving them lavish apartments and whatnot. It just kind of means, like you said, just some funding here and there for these organizations that are already curating, to a certain degree. And you can have vendor shows and things like that. But, that'll get you through a weekend, but it won't really, it's not really a steady living. And, I don't know. I'm struggling to figure out if this is a Fort Worth problem or if it's just a cultural problem that we all have right now, with art being devalued generally. I don't know.
One thing I would say that maybe would counter it is if it's actually, I should say, agree with you that it's a Fort Worth problem. We can look at the numbers. We can look at the numbers across the state and see what per capita spending is on art, and we know Fort Worth's at the bottom. There was Austin. Geez, Austin kicks ass.
They do a lot better than we do.
Oh my gosh! I mean, they're about the same size as us, right? We just
right, yeah. We're bigger than them now.
But they're like over magnitude of 10 times, more funding,
Yeah.
So
that's a cultural thing, though. Like that's kind of, but even they are suffering. Like South by Southwest, is cutting back significantly next year. Or they're not focusing on the music aspect. They're doing more of the tech stuff, which makes sense because that tends to be who runs the town now, is the tech folks.
If we're to be fair, because we're talking about public funding, we're big advocates for it, but that can be very mercurial, right? It can like Fort Worth's very focused on film right now. So,
right.
Maybe they were focused on artists, several years ago and musicians. Now it's film. And so honestly, there is an argument to be made that, if you're just focused solely on public funds, they're not always going to be there for you either.
Right.
And so I do think there needs to be some diversification. I think in the short term, it is easier to get the city to fund, the art. So I think it's worth it. That's actually a little bit easier conversation. But beyond that, because the cities they'll cut arts funding, and so you don't want to ever be totally reliant on that. And having a good donor base, as a nonprofit is important. And then of course we talk about the bigger philanthropic stuff. And I've heard some nonprofits say that Fort does pretty well on corporate giving, but I haven't seen that. But
yeah, but again, that's kind of one of those things where. And I saw this when I was living in New York. You had kind of a stratified system where you had the stuff that was for the rich people, and then you had the stuff that was kind of for everybody else that was kind of on the ground level. And I think there's a bit of that around here too, where there's kind of galleries that cater more to the upper crust, and then there's outlets that are looking more for the working class. And I think that often. Again, I don't have the numbers for this, but I would imagine that the amount of funding for those is stratified as well, and that because just people who that other cast of artists is trying to reach are just people who just don't have as much money.
I think you're right. No, I think that's a good point. We have different strata. We have the grassroots artists who are doing little fairs here and there. No. We have large nonprofits, performing arts groups. I would say that the Clyburn's one that does well financially. Point to them. And their donor base they have a lot of wealthier people that just kind of identify with what they do, right? So they just kind of benefit from that. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but
well, it's seen more as in the same way that something like the Kimball, it's seen more as a thing that it's okay for rich people to do, for rich people to support, and I know you've covered like the classical music in town as well, and I imagine they rely pretty heavily on wealthy donor base to keep that stuff going too, in a way that like a rock band might not necessarily be able to do. We had we had a kind of a music town hall over at Printed Threads a few months ago. I'd say a few months ago, it's probably a year ago, after like 3 clubs closed in quick succession, and they brought the Texas Music Office in and basically to assure us, it's okay. People are still out there making money, making music. It's like, yeah, but not all of us though. There's some folks who can do it. And
I would say that, I would also just add that galleries, are having a hard time.
Yeah.
And Fort Worth, I just know that they're having a hard time. You would think, well, you're selling $50,000 paintings, but they've kind of reached their audience, and you can only hold so much art in your house. So I think the good news is, at Fort Worth we're growing, and I think a lot of these art galleries and even the bigger nonprofit performing arts groups, they're all trying to find their next donor base. They're all trying to find that next group of, people who are coming out. It's funny, we've got a lot of money. It's like,
there's certainly no shortage of money. And it's interesting because we went, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like last year we jumped 2 spaces in the population hierarchy. Like we went from 13th to 12th. And then we went from 12th to 11th, like in the course of maybe 12 months or maybe a little more than that, Matt.
Correct.
And you can see it. The rents are going through the roof, and there's there's a lot of people who are out there spending money. And I think you're right. I think the thing that people are trying to do is figure out, all right, how do I get to those people, who are these new Fort Worthians, and who would be interested in what we're doing. And, of course, I don't know the answer to that, but and some of them I meet, out when I'm playing gigs and stuff. It's becoming more common that when I talk to somebody at a show, they're not from here. And that used to not be that usual, but it's becoming kind of the default, honestly. And so... yeah, trying to figure out how to reach those folks and to get them interested in what's going on locally is kind of tricky.
What's your perspective? We talked about artists. We all know that live music has taken a bit of a hit, especially in the venues. And it's not just here; it is across the country. I think we're all kind of asking. It's a combination of stuff.
Well,
you could talk. That could be its own show. But what are you seeing?
Some of it's generational. So. Like I've got a Gen Z daughter, and
it is generation. I agree. They don't go out as much.
They just don't, and so most of their music interaction is online, and so that's part of it. Is you used to be able to rely on a new group of people filling the clubs every few years, and now when you go to live music venues, there's an awful lot more gray hair than there used to be, and of course those of us with gray hair. A lot of our time is spent taking care of business, taking care of the kids, work. And so we don't just go to clubs on the regular as much as we used to. And so I feel like that's part of it. Another part of it is just the fact that, when you think about, I think this is kind of 100 years coming, really. Like live music used to be, that was the way you saw music. That was the only way you could see it, as if it were live. And then we had recorded music. Recorded music became big business. Now it's so ubiquitous. It's just that you go anywhere. You go to the drugstore, you go to the, wherever, and there's music. It's not a rare thing to hear music. And it's so convenient now to just pull up anything you want to on your phone that I think it's just lost kind of its luster of being something special, unless you've had those kinds of magical concert experiences that so many of us have had that are not really replaceable by a YouTube video or whatever. And I don't know how the only thing that I kind of halfway hope for is that some of the younger folks are going analog in a lot of other ways. Like there's new bands putting out cassettes and stuff like that. And maybe if their push towards analog maybe could extend to going to a show, maybe that would help a bit. But most of the shows I play, honestly, these days are either hotel bars or restaurants, or it's not usually a standard club. And I think that's just kind of it's an odd, and that's not just me. That's a lot. Most musicians I know. So it is kind of an odd change that we're going through, and I don't know where it ends up. I don't know if it ends up kind of where we were at before the 20th century, where musicians were just kind of these people who hung around in the background of society, and played sad songs at the fountain or whatever. But we're definitely in some kind of transition point, and I'm trying to figure out where it's going. I don't know.
Yeah, and I wish I had some good news, but there's one.
You and me both.
I mean, there's a couple problems. There are some systemic problems. There was like an NPR story I read last year talking about just the availability of music from every decade now.
Yeah.
And so I think they were testing kind of like what music do kids listen to. Mm-hmm. And historically, teenagers listen to the music of their generation, right? Now they don't. They go back in time. So
it is interesting.
It's kind of, you have great music, from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s, and you can just live through all of those hits and never have to listen to contemporary songwriting.
Well, and I think about it too. Like you listen to the radio and whatnot, and they'll say music from the 80s, 90s, and today. Well, today has now been 25 years, and to be able to differentiate like pop music from 2025 from pop music of 2005, into my ear, there's not as much difference as there would be between 2005 and 1995 or 1995 and 1985. The differences in pop music, and that's been deliberate on the part of labels. They're reselling stuff that they already know how to do. So that's another cultural force that's pushing. I mean, my kiddo listens to Woody Guthrie, for Pete's sake, So it's like there is a quality drop off that's happening in at least in mainstream pop music. Now in other branches of music, mostly independent, there's an incredible amount of good stuff going on, but it's just not hitting the top 10. And so people just go, well, we're just gonna. And sometimes there's a nostalgia thing too of kind of creating in the same way that I would say maybe politically we're doing that. We're trying to return to some imagined era where everything was better, and only to realize that actually it was kind of, there was crap there too. Because
some parts of our country are brainwashed and looking for that.
Yeah, and I've been like, well, and
not everyone.
No, not everybody, but I think that there's. I'm as a person who's in his 50s now, I fight real hard against the nostalgia, because I have to realize that, as much good stuff happened, during my formative years, there was also a lot of crap too. In the same way that, people talk about the 60s, and there was a lot of great music in the 60s. That's true, but there was also a lot of crap. And, the stuff that survived was the good stuff, and then the stuff that fell by the wayside, nobody really talks about it anymore, was the crap. And that's been the case, in popular music for a long time. And, it can be tempting to say, that there was some time in the past where everything was great. But I think that's one of those things that old men always say. And I try real hard not to be that guy. Especially because I don't believe it, because I remember enough of the past to go, there's bits of that I definitely wouldn't want to relive. Just the ease of putting out a record. God, how hard it was to put out a record in the 90s. It was expensive and it was real unwieldy. You can put out a record now. It's easier than it ever has been to do that. So I definitely wouldn't go back on. I'm finishing up an album right now that I did entirely at my house. So, that's not something that would have been possible back then with the budget I have. So I don't know. I think that kind of thing, you talked earlier about what is our God? And I think sometimes that is built upon kind of an imagined past, like the thing that we're trying to get to is a thing that we used to have but we don't need more. It's kind of one of those, it's kind of a Tolkien type of these were the great times and then we have fallen from the greatness and now we're in this kind of twilight. And I don't know, it feels like that feels more like a story to me than like reality. But I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's how we perceive time, and it can't explain the past. There has to be kind of winners and losers,
right?
To process it.
Well, and there's a lot of I've read some articles about this, kind of talking about the culture that we've ended up with was the one that was the best at destroying the competing cultures. And so a lot of things that we think, well, clearly this is the best thing because this is the thing that won. Maybe there were some other really great things that came out of other cultures, but they were just not as good at killing people as we were. If you put all your eggs in that basket, you're going to be the dominant one regardless. But that's a kind of a grim way to look at it. But it's also, I think there are so many different ways of having a culture that, and in various points in history, people have tried various different ways of having a culture. And I don't know that we always need to assume that the one we happen to be born in is the best one, but that's why I'm a pinko commie, I guess,
Well, there's something we can appreciate. I mean, I definitely don't want to do away with air conditioning and
right, exactly. Oh my God, I was thinking about that the other day. So the AC went out in my car. AC went out in my car, and I was thinking about.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I was remembering.
Well, it's not hot yet, so not the worst time yet.
For the moment, I got a little fan that's fine, but like I was thinking about my granddad back in the 30s. He was working downtown Dallas. He would wear a suit and tie to work every day in a non-air conditioned building. Presumably in the heat of August. And I guess it can be done. It's not ideal, but it can certainly be done. People have been doing it, but there is certainly the demographic fact that the population of Texas spiked dramatically once air conditioning was invented. Because prior to that, people didn't really want to live here.
Unless you really had to,
right. Or if you were running from the law, that was back in the 1800s. Yeah. This was a great place to be because
no one wanted to chase you to Texas.
So my great however many grandfathers ago, I'm pretty sure that's his story because there's a branch of Broyleses in Tennessee, and this guy just left one day and came down here and didn't tell anybody. And I met up with some folks who were descendant from the other ones, and they were like, yeah, that's the guy nobody knows anything about. And I was like, that makes sense. He was running from something.
Yeah, go look through those old wanted posters, and you'll see your great grandpappy.
Yeah, that would make so much sense. That's what was going on.
And now I wonder what crime he committed. Was it a cool crime, or was it one you'd be kind of ashamed of?
And it might not have even been like a legal crime. He might have just been he knocked somebody up, or I don't know. But
yeah, I'm just trying to think of that's an interesting topic. One other thing I guess I would mention. I'm just kind of bouncing around here, just because I talk to I'm always interviewing people, so I guess in that sense I kind of get the pulse of what's going on at Fort Worth. Just talking to people, and Fort Worth is having an interesting time because people are interested in Westernism.
Yes,
Western everything, and that's applying to fashion, culture. I hear a lot of when I talk to people who are in retail, designing clothing and things, are like, man, we're just killing it because people, want a piece of Fort Worth. So
yeah,
I do think the city has a pretty bright future.
Well, certainly it's not shrinking. Well, that's what I worry about is this boom is coinciding with all these massive forces that are trying to basically destroy the civilization. So I don't know how big our boom's going to last. It's kind of like I was reading the other day, South Korea's population bomb, is going to go off in 2050 or so. And well, they're making money while they can, exporting all these K-pop bands and whatnot, and, but I feel like we're kind of almost, the violinists on the deck of the Titanic, it's not something I want because again, I'm a father and I don't want my kid to grow up in a shithole. But I also kind of this has been a march that's been happening my entire life, and starting with the Reaganites and all that. There is one thing we can do, and this is I think there is even someone trying to pass some legislation right now. Can we all agree that the president shouldn't have the power to unilaterally set tariffs? Yeah,
can we reach the point where we're like that shouldn't be one person's purview?
Yeah, and that's the imperial presidency has been an issue since the time of Nixon, and the Congress has abdicated more and more of its authority to the president, and I think we're definitely seeing even people in his own party going, hey, maybe it would be good if you ran this by us first.
Well, I think the bill they're proposing right now would have to be approved by Congress. But
yes, it would.
This guy can sign a piece of paper, and it doesn't just wreck our economy; it's the world.
Well, and that's essentially that's the imperial president. That's you essentially have an emperor at that point.
It's a king. Yeah.
And the whole point of having the other branches is to prevent that from happening. And the fact that it is happening is one of the things that definitely has to be addressed on just a bedrock fundamental level, and it's
like an amendment to the Constitution or something.
Yeah, something like that. And maybe that's the one thing that both sides can get together on. Is I
think so, actually,
because I've said this for years, if you had the most liberal president that ever got elected get in there, then the Republicans would be talking about, we have to find ways to curtail him, and I feel like that should be the case regardless of who's in office. You have, you maintaining the co-equal nature of those branches is one of the things that keeps us out of the hole.
I mean, it's a, I don't know if it's a partisan statement, but there's something to the idea that government works best when it doesn't work. And sometimes it's okay for stalemates to happen, right? That's actually sometimes that if one party can pull back the other one, and sometimes that's the best case scenario.
Well, and I've said for years, I would love to have a competent opposition party, one that you could have real policy discussions with, but that's not what we have. We have we have WWE essentially. We have this reality TV thing that we're calling politics now, and there's no real I'm not seeing policy discussions. I'm seeing my team won and your team lost. Suck it. You know? Yeah. And that's real. I think that part of that is that Americans, you know, we are the best entertained culture in history, you know, and and I think we have come to see everything as entertainment. And if it's not entertaining, we don't know what to do with it. And so, of course, we elect a game show host, you know. That's the logical, you know, I mean, idiocracy is kind of upon us, you know, in that way. But I do feel like, though, that's kind of a piece with the whole thing of the arts, you know. It's like, I think often anything that's not Kid Rock or you know, some kind of Pop-Tart thing gets seen as too fancy. I, even going back to when I was a kid in the 80s, that, you know, that was kind of how it was talked about. And it's frustrating to someone who is a lover of art and who is also somebody who understands that in order for it to exist, you have to have a functional civilization. And like, I've got friends who are just itching for the Mad Max stuff to start, because, you know, they've got the stockpiles and they've got all that stuff. I don't want any of that. Art does not function very well in those conditions. So, yeah, that's.
I think so. So maybe, you know, maybe we can kind of conclude our, you know,
yes.
Why is art struggling right now in society? Well, it's struggling if the foundation of society is not healthy, right? There's something that's not undergirding and allowing, you know, it to thrive.
Well, there's two schools of thought, I think, often on that site. Art is often born of struggle, and there is a lot of great work that was created because of struggle. But there's also a lot of great work that is created when the means to create great work are abundant. And so, yeah, you can have somebody who can write a great book in a gulag, and, you know, it may be successful later, but that doesn't really help the artist that much. And I feel like we're kind of, I mean, you know, no empire lasts forever, and, you know, we're no different. But there are different ways that empires can go. Like, there's kind of the Great Britain route, where you can just sort of slowly shrink, you know, and then there's and then there's like and
nobody hates them.
Right. Right.
All little colonies still playing rugby and cricket and, you know, summing it up.
Exactly. And speaking that language, you know, but there's like,
I know.
But then there's the other way of going, which is just in a thunderous crash, and I'm more worried that that's happening with us. But I don't know. Yeah. I'm not a soothsayer nor a clairvoyant, but I feel like that it's.
You are a podcast host, though.
Well, I know, but that's like. I kind of agree with people who say you should put tariffs on white guys who have podcasts, because there's an awful lot of us.
Finally, I agree with the tariff.
That's one of the middle-aged white guys, you know, making podcasts because there's a lot of that going on. But it's also one of those things where it's like, I don't know, why not? You know, because I like having conversations with interesting people. Where can they find your stuff, Mr. Edward Brown, if they're looking for you?
Yeah, thanks. It's been fun talking to you, Matthew. Yeah. Well, you know, the biggest outlet I have right now is Paper City. I mean, it's lighter stuff than I used to. So I know it's not everyone's thing, but I do get to write about the arts and theater. I mean, tomorrow we're going to have a story come out about this collaboration between Circle Theater, Stage West, and Dallas. I just turned that in.
Okay.
So if you haven't, you know, followed Paper City for arts coverage, you know, add that to your roster, and you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, of course, papercity.com. Maybe that's my best piece of advice.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thanks very much for coming on the show, and best of luck to you and your future endeavors.
I'll see you around. I'm sure over a glass of beer sometime.
That would be fantastic. All right. I'll talk to you later, man.
All right. Cheers.
This program is brought to you by Naive Media. Visit thematthewshow.com for info on this and other programs.